It really doesn't surprise me that we have this split mindset. Going back to the beginning, it's been a geographic issue. We pushed into the interior of the continent, and we found navigable waterways and fertile land with good weather. It was, from the old world pre-industrial point of view, nirvana. And we experienced 150 years of economic growth. And for us, that's normal. This is what it should be. And so anytime that we experience a setback or a hiccup, we're convinced like the end is nigh, and we're convinced that our system is about to collapse. And it hasn't been true since the beginning. It's not true today. Does that mean we can't do better? Of course not. Of course we can do better. But if you compare the United States' track record to any other country in the world, we are already the second oldest government on the planet, second only to the Brits. And we have exited every decade in a more powerful position than we entered it, both in terms of our own national economy and relative to the global norms. That hasn't changed in the last 30 years. Let's dial it back a touch just so you can understand how we got to where we are.
All right.
At the end of World War II, the Americans changed the way the global system worked. It used to be that you were either in an empire and you lorded over countries or colonies that would give you resources and serve as captive markets, or you were one of those colonies and life wasn't all that great. So what the Americans did is we said that we would use our Navy to patrol the global ocean so that anyone could go anywhere at any time and interface with any partner and access any material or market, if in exchange you would side with us against the Soviets in the Cold War. We bought an alliance. And that meant that many countries, most countries, could industrialize for the first time. That changed the way we live. Not only did we all of a sudden have this explosion in economic activity because of access, we saw people moving off the farm and into the cities to take industrial and services jobs. Higher value added, more income. But when you live on a farm, kids are free labor, so you have a bunch. When you live in a condo, kids are just really expensive, loud pieces of mobile furniture, and adults aren't dumb, so we have fewer of them. And starting at different times, moving at different rates, the birth rate across the world collapsed. Started, of course, with Western Europe, but by the time we got to 1992, the entire developing world had globalized as well, so it happened there even faster. Well, remember that for the Americans, this was never about economics, it was about security. So we started backing away from globalization back in the 90s, and today we're the least globalized economy out there of size. In addition, we're a large country with a lot of elbow room, and so we didn't jump directly from the farm to condos. We had this middle step with the suburbs, which are still where most Americans live today. And if you got a backyard, kids are a lower expense than they would be if you lived in a condo. So our economy was never exposed to those forces, and our demographics never changed as much as everybody else. And now that we're on the backside of it all, that is going to do very well for us, because we have the healthiest demography in the rich world and the most isolated and self-contained economy in the rich world. And the country that is number one in the developing world is, by those metrics, isn't China, that's Mexico, and we're bolted together with them. So any country that has done well economically, especially for the last 40 years, you got to look at why. And if it's because of these urbanization and globalization trends, you got to recognize that those are not one-way trends. Globalization is now running in reverse. And that demographic consolidation that we saw with fewer kids, you fast forward that 70 years and you start to run low on 60-year-olds. And that's where we are in most of the world today. That's especially where we are with China today. So we're looking at all of these global trends that we think of as normal, with energy and manufacturers trade and globalized agriculture and finance. They were all designed for a world that no longer exists. And that means on the backside, we have to do one of two things. Number one, we have to figure out how to get by with less. Or number two, we need to figure out how to make more at home. And the United States is in a very good position for both of those. Because of the shale revolution, we never really had to worry about the energy problem. Because of our geography, we never had to worry about the agricultural problem. Because of the millennials, one of those younger generations that exist here but not elsewhere, we don't have to worry about the consumption problem. So the hiccups that we have to deal with, the retirement of the baby boomers, the shock to energy markets, they're all relevant, but they're not kind of the bedrock challenges that we're facing the level of challenge that we're facing in the US is nothing compared to the level of challenge elsewhere, where the very foundations of what makes their societies function is breaking apart because of factors that are manifesting beyond the horizon, well beyond their ability to control them. China's at the top of that list. Germany is in the process of rapidly moving up the list. We'll probably be in the number 3 position by the end of this year. But for the United States, it's an opportunity. And it's one I'm happy to say American industry is already grabbing with both hands. And we are seeing right now the fastest industrialization the country has ever seen, including the effort to fight World War II. And it's not a one-off. We've been segueing in this direction now for 8 years. It would be good if we did it faster. I hate to say it, it's probably the latter. Every once in a while, the United States reshuffles its political system. One of the pros and cons of having a two-party system, and our Constitution pretty much guarantees that we'll always have only 2 parties for the long term, is that they have to be big tent parties to bring in that extra marginal voter to outvote the next guy. That means that we have weak party structures. So like if the Senate Majority Leader is having a problem with the rank and file, it can really get out of hand. But it also means that our political system tends to be pretty flexible, because as technology and geopolitics and culture evolve, the parties move with it, and the factions that make up the parties move around. Every once in a while, those changes in the trends reach a boiling point, and one or both parties breaks apart, and then the factions shuffle around and make new alliances, or maybe voters that used to be in the swing position join a party, or vice versa. We're going through one of those periods now. We had the rise of globalization, we have the fall of globalization. We had the rise of the baby boomers, we had the retirement of the baby boomers. We had the technological revolution and the internet age. Of course, we're going to manage our politics different, but it's awkward. And you add in social media, and every faction wants to make their issue the litmus test for whatever the new party alliance happens to be. And so everyone is now screaming at the top of their lungs at the same time. All I can guarantee you is we will get through this. This is the 7th time we've done this. It's only generated a war once. We've got a positive demography, and assuming we get back to our 2-century norm, we'll probably have positive inward migration again. About 1% of the housing stock is destroyed by age and fire every year, so we have a constant need to churn, and we have the lowest amount of housing stock relative to the population that we've ever had. So the need for a huge build out is there. That's in addition to the fact that we probably need to double the size of our industrial plant to make up for manufacturing supply chains that are breaking and that won't come back. So if you have a marketable skill, especially in the trades, oh my God, you're going to do so well. We are already in a position where a high school graduate with a 6-week welding degree makes more on the job in his first year than a white-collar worker does after 5 years of work experience and their college degree. So that's already a little wonko. It's probably going to get worse, because the same demographic transition that has affected most of the rest of the world, it's affected Mexico too. Not as bad and not as soon, but we're probably at the end of positive inward migration from Mexico, which means we have to generate all of that labor internally in an environment where the baby boomers, our largest class ever, is moving out of the workforce, and the Zoomers, our smallest one ever, is moving in. This calendar year, that's already a shortage of 400,000 workers. Normally, we turn to Mexico for that. It doesn't work anymore. So this labor crunch is going to shape everything. It is a good time to be in the trades. I can't imagine any workers are going to see a smaller wage increase over the next decade. I will never tell people that printing $1 trillion of currency isn't inflationary. Obviously, it's inflationary, but honestly, it doesn't make my top 5 list. The labor issue is by far the biggest one. That worker gap that we have. Not only is it numerical, it's also qualitative. The Zoomers are not like the Boomers or the Millennials. They're sharply antisocial. They're very competitive, and they only want certain types of jobs where they're not reliant on someone else, and preferably where they don't have to see anyone else. They want to code in the dark in a closet. That's great if you're in Silicon Valley, but if you're trying to get a house built, it's a bit of a problem. So we're not just going to have labor inflation building over time because of numbers, but because of mismatched skill sets. Beyond that, we have an energy shock because of what's going on with the Ukraine war, and an agricultural shock because of what's going on with the Ukraine war. Now, the US is the world's largest producer of food and energy, and is the world's largest exporter of food and of refined energy products. So we are only as exposed to the global market as we choose to be. And the Biden administration does have some options for severing that connection.